Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something important, how we deal with fear and maybe find some genuine peace.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
Definitely. And our source material for this is, well, it's quite specific. We're looking at an excerpt from the Faith Beams GP podcast. It's episode 5,
Mm-hmm.
titled Fearless Through the Night, Living Without Fear. And it really zooms in on one verse, Psalm 91.5. Oh, and GP, that's about spiritual growth, practical faith stuff.
Got it.
So our mission today is basically to pull out the key ideas from this source. How does it talk about handling anxiety, those things that feel threatening, and finding that inner calm?
Right.
Because this source, it offers a particular view on protection, on victory even, arguing you don't have to be, well, sort of trapped by fear.
And what immediately jumps out from the source, I think, is that core theme. It's this promise of safety.
Safety.
Yeah, but not just like physical safety from danger, but safety from the feeling of fear itself. That's a key distinction it makes.
Mm.
It presents this idea of a divine presence as the ultimate source of peace. So it's about finding inner quiet regardless of the outside noise.
Okay, so let's look at that foundational verse the source uses,
Yeah.
Psalm 91.5. It says, "You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day."
Pretty direct.
Very direct.
What do you think is maybe the boldest claim the source attaches to this verse in terms of really getting rid of fear?
Well, what's interesting is how the source breaks it down. It doesn't just talk about general danger. It points to two specific types of threats right there in the verse.
Okay.
First, the nighttime terror. And it describes that as, anxiety, bad dreams, fear of the unknown, that kind of thing. Then second, you've got the daytime arrows. And that's presented more as spiritual attacks, negative talk, betrayal, conflict, things that happen when you're wide awake.
Right, the more visible stuff sometimes.
Exactly. And just splitting it like that is, well, it's a helpful way to think about where fear might be coming from, almost mapping it out.
And the source doesn't just list the threats, does it? It immediately gives a kind of counter statement. It calls the verse a divine reset for your emotions. That phrase really stood out.
It did.
What's the thinking there? Is it like saying, you can actively flip a switch, use the verse to change your mental state?
Yeah, that seems to be the implication. It's presented as more than just a nice thought. It's like a fundamental recalibration.
Okay.
The idea is that actually engaging with this verse, maybe speaking it, can genuinely change your emotional default setting, choosing a different response, like you said, a mental reboot.
So when it gets into the terror of night, it lists things like sleeplessness, insomnia, nightmares. Pretty standard stuff we associate with night fears.
Right.
But then it also mentions spiritual attacks. How does the source seem to define those? Are they different from just, say, bad anxiety or mental health struggles?
That's a good question. From the source's perspective, it seems to frame spiritual attacks as something distinct. Maybe an external, unseen influence specifically trying to disrupt your peace. So it might manifest as intense anxiety or fearful thoughts. But the source suggests the root, in some cases, might be perceived as external and targeted, needing a spiritual counter-approach.
I see. So differentiating is important for applying the suggested solution within its framework.
Exactly. Because if you see it that way, then the solution offered, focusing on divine protection, makes specific sense.
And the source brings in another verse here for context, right? Psalm 121.4.
It does. He who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep.
That's a powerful image. The idea being, while you're maybe struggling and awake with fear, this higher power is presented as constantly alert, watching over you.
Yeah, it provides that sense of constant vigilance from outside yourself. And this is where the source uses some really vivid real-life stories.
Like Maria from Suriname.
Yes, exactly. Maria's story. She's a 29-year-old midwife, and she was dealing with just constant anxiety, real torment at night. Couldn't sleep properly. Her turning point, according to the source, was reading Psalm 91 out loud one night. And then she actually put her Bible under her pillow.
Okay, a physical act of faith there.
Right. And the source reports she had her first full night's sleep in months. She apparently called the verse her sleeping pill of faith.
Wow. That's quite a statement.
Yeah.
Sleeping pill of faith.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About those invisible wars people might be fighting privately at night.
Absolutely.
You see someone during the day, they seem fine. But You don't know what happens when they're alone in the dark.
Mm.
Her story suggests a tangible shift is possible.
It really does. It underscores the source's part that actively doing something with that belief, like Maria did, can, from this perspective, lead to a real breakthrough. It's not passive.
Okay, so that covers the night terrors, the unseen stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what about those daytime challenges, the things that hit us when we're out and about?
Right, the arrows by day.
The source calls these more visible kinds of warfare, things like harsh words, maybe betrayal at work, family stress, money worries, sudden panic attacks, being judged or accused, even facing persecution. These are often public or at least concrete issues.
Yeah, very relatable struggles. And again, the source immediately offers that counter declaration, pulling from Isaiah 54:17.
Which is?
No arrow formed against you shall prosper. So it's not just saying you'll survive the hit.
Right.
It's suggesting the attack itself will ultimately fail, like there's a shield. It reframes how you might receive that conflict or negativity.
Well, there's another story here, Pastor Kwame in Guyana.
Yes, his story illustrates this daytime arrow ideal well. He was a youth pastor facing public attacks, false accusations during some kind of leadership conflict.
And from people he trusted, apparently. That adds another layer of hurt.
Definitely. But his response, as the source tells it, was interesting. He didn't fight back publicly. He stayed quiet, but privately declared Psalm 91 every day.
And what happened?
Well, eventually the truth came out. His accusers ended up apologizing. And Kwame's reflection was, God defended me better than I could have defended myself.
That really brings the verse to life, doesn't it? Seeing it applied in that kind of situation.
It does. And then there's Siobhan from Trinidad and Tobago. Her fear was different, but just as real.
What happened with her?
She worked in education, community outreach. There was a break-in at her center, and afterwards she became deeply fearful. Afraid to walk alone, afraid to leave work late.
Understandable. That kind of event can really shake you.
For sure. Her method, according to the source, was reciting Psalm 91.5 every morning. I will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day. Just repeating it.
And did it help?
The source says yes, eventually the fear broke. She felt bolder, gained wisdom, and wasn't a prisoner of fear anymore, which leads to that powerful line the source uses.
Fear is not your inheritance, faith is.
Exactly. It frames faith not just as a belief, but as your rightful inheritance, something you can claim over fear, especially when things get tough. It's a psychological shift as much as a spiritual one.
So beyond these personal stories, the source also looks back at historical figures, biblical figures as examples.
Right, using well-known stories to reinforce the point.
We have David facing Goliath.
Yeah.
Daylight seems totally outmatched, no armor but God, as the source puts it.
Mm-hmm.
Then Daniel sleeping peacefully in the lion's den at night. Total opposite situation, but same result.
Yeah, peace and peril.
And Paul and Silas singing in prison at midnight despite being unjustly locked up. What's the common thread the source pulls from these big examples? It's not just that they survived.
Well, looking at those examples together, David, Daniel, Paul, and Silas, the source, makes the observation that God's people have always been marked by peace and panic.
Peace and panic, okay.
So it's not about waiting for the storm to pass to feel peace. It's about finding or claiming an inner stability during the storm. That seems to be the key takeaway from those examples. Proactive peace, maybe.
Okay, so that's the theory, the examples. But what about actually doing this? Does the source give practical steps?
It does. It offers some pretty concrete how-to advice for, walking in this kind of fearless faith it described.
Like what?
Okay, first, it suggests actually speaking Psalm 91.5 out loud every night before bed, every morning when you wake up.
Vocalizing it.
Yeah. Then it talks about actively breaking agreements with fear. Basically, verbally declaring something like, fear has no power over me.
That's interesting terminology. Agreements with fear.
It is. It implies fear sometimes operates with our maybe subconscious permission, and we can revoke that permission.
Okay, what else?
Simpler things too, like placing a Bible or even just a scripture card with the verse near your bed or desk, a visual reminder.
Right.
And finally, it encourages sharing this perspective with someone else who might be struggling, and also just taking time to reflect on your own experiences with fear and faith.
So these aren't just passive ideas. They're framed as active things to do. Speaking, declaring, placing, sharing, reflecting.
Exactly. It's about consistent, intentional action to reinforce that mindset of peace over fear, engaging the promise, not just knowing about it.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've really journeyed through how this particular source, this podcast episode, presents the idea of living without fear. We've looked at night terrors, daytime arrows, the stories, the examples.
Yeah, it's covered a lot of ground unpacking that one verse.
It really has.
And maybe this leaves you, the listener, with a question to ponder. What might it look like to proactively cultivate that kind of inner peace using principles like these? How could consistently engaging with this idea of overcoming fear not only change your own daily experience, but maybe even how you support others facing their own challenges, seen or unseen?
That's a really good thought to sit with. And just for context, this episode we looked at, episode 5, is part of a much larger series on Psalm 91 from that podcast.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, apparently the next one, episode 6, gets into overcoming the hidden pestilence and midday plague. Some more aspects of the psalm.
Sounds like there's more to explore there.
Definitely. But for today, maybe we can end with the closing message from the source material we discussed.
Go for it.
Rest in peace. God is guarding you day and night, and the terror shall not come near you.